They said he had 7 days left, a week of slow-moving minutes and thick silence broken only by the dull clank of prison doors and the faint scurry of rats in concrete corners, and Marcus Hale, inmate 147932, once decorated Army canine handler turned convicted killer, had asked for nothing during his 12 years on death row. No visitors, no interviews, no press, no last statements to the world that once called him a hero and now called him a monster. Until now, when he made a single, final request to see his dog, Buck, the Belgian Malinois he had trained, served with, bled with, and last seen on the day everything shattered, the day the convoy was ambushed in Kandahar and the world stopped making sense, and the warden, a cold-eyed bureaucrat named O'Donnell who'd learned long ago to ignore human pain behind paperwork, had raised an eyebrow, muttered something about regulations, and then quietly pulled some strings because even executioners sometimes want to believe in the myth of redemption, and so the wheels turned, slow, reluctant, but turning, until on the 5th day, a black SUV pulled up to the prison gates with a retired military handler in the passenger seat and a gray-muzzled dog in the back, eyes sharp despite the years, a ghost of war on 4 legs, and Marcus, shackled and silent, was led into the visitation room, heart pounding, mouth dry, and when the door opened and Buck padded in, there was no bark, no whine, only recognition so deep it split Marcus open, a slow tail wag, a lowering of the head, a soundless communion of souls severed by time and pain, and Marcus knelt, chains rattling, tears scalding down his cheeks as he buried his face into Buck's neck and whispered apologies for things he could never undo, for the villagers, the boy, the panic, the way he'd reacted, pulling the trigger too fast, too scared, too angry, haunted ever since not just by what he did but by how no one ever let him explain, not even himself, because the truth was too ugly, too complicated, buried beneath layers of trauma and orders and lies, and Buck, who had been retired quietly after the incident, had gone to live with a foster handler who didn't ask questions, who knew only that this dog woke up barking in the middle of the night and paced in circles like he was looking for someone he'd lost. And now, as Marcus held him, there was something unspoken in the air, some fracture in the universe where guilt and forgiveness coexisted for a breathless second, and then something strange happened, something that hadn't occurred in all the years of Marcus's incarceration. Buck growled, a low warning from deep in his chest, not at Marcus, but at the guard behind him, a twitchy man with a lazy eye and a clipboard, who stiffened, muttered that it was time, and started to move forward. But Buck growled louder, hackles rising, and Marcus's instincts kicked in, honed from years of silent communication, and he looked at the guard more closely. The sweat, the odd bulge under the shirt, the nervous glances, and a flash of memory hit him. The guard hadn't been on rotation last week, or the week before, and suddenly Buck lunged, not to attack, but to distract, giving Marcus just enough time to yank free of his guard's loosened grip, kick the clipboard from the man's hand, and reveal, taped underneath, a small device, a transmitter, blinking red, and chaos erupted. Alarms, shouting, scrambling feet, guards storming in with weapons drawn, and O'Donnell barking orders, but it was too late. Buck had found something he hadn't been trained to find, a bomb trigger disguised as a pen, and in the confusion, Marcus saw his chance, not to escape, but to speak, to force the truth out, because someone wanted him silenced before he could use that final interview he'd finally agreed to give, the one scheduled for the next morning with a journalist who'd dug too deep into his trial, who'd started asking questions about the evidence, the missing body cam footage, the mysterious disappearance of witnesses, and now someone inside the prison, someone with clearance and access, had tried to stage an accident or a terror attempt, anything that would end Marcus's story before it could be rewritten. And as Buck was restrained and Marcus was dragged back to his cell, bloody but alive, he knew something he hadn't felt in years. Purpose, the fire of unfinished business, and somewhere beneath the weight of guilt and loss, a truth waiting to rise, and as the cell slammed shut, he whispered to Buck through the tiny barred window in the hallway, "Good boy, we're not done yet." The days after the failed assassination attempt unfolded like a slow-burning fever. The prison transformed from a place of punishment into a battlefield of secrets, its sterile halls humming with rumors and eyes that watched too long, too quietly, and Marcus Hale, no longer just a condemned man but now a threat to someone powerful, was moved to solitary for his protection. Though the irony wasn't lost on him as the walls closed in tighter and the lights never dimmed, designed to break the mind gently, like a wire pulled slowly through flesh. But Marcus had endured worse in desert caves and ambushes soaked in blood, and he focused not on the cell, or the cold food, or the mocking glances of guards who whispered too much and knew too little, but on Buck, his old partner, who had seen what no one else did and acted without hesitation, just like in the field, and now rested somewhere in the prison kennel under evaluation, though Marcus suspected the dog was being held as leverage, a tool of control or silencing, and that thought lit something in him, something burning and primal, not just the bond of soldier and dog but the bond of shared truth, a thing sacred and sharp. And as the hours crawled, Marcus replayed the incident over and over, analyzing the guard's face, the device, the precise moment Buck shifted from comfort to defense, and with each recollection, the pieces started to align. The timing of the visit, the sudden reversal of the warden's decision to allow the dog in, the unusually high-ranking personnel present that day, all signs of something coordinated, not just petty prison politics but something deeper, older, darker, and it clicked with a memory from the trial, how the prosecution had leaned heavily on the idea that Marcus snapped after the ambush in Kandahar, how they painted a picture of a soldier broken beyond reason who gunned down civilians out of paranoia. But what if someone needed him to be seen that way, not just for closure, but to bury something? And when the journalist, Evelyn Kincaid, finally showed up for the interview, 3 days late and with bruises beneath her eyes poorly concealed by makeup, Marcus knew she had paid a price for her curiosity, and yet there she was, standing beyond the plexiglass divider with her recorder clutched in trembling fingers and fire in her eyes, saying, "They tried to scare me off, that only made me hungrier." And he respected her instantly, because courage recognizes its own. And over the next hour, he spoke, really spoke, for the first time in years, not about the killing but about everything around it, the orders given and then denied, the informant that vanished after the operation, the classified files that mysteriously vanished from the convoy logs, and the third-party contractors who arrived just minutes after the incident and whisked away evidence under the guise of clean up. And Evelyn's expression shifted from curiosity to dread as she realized this wasn't just a miscarriage of justice. It was a cover-up, a messy one wrapped in red tape and military silence. And she told Marcus that 2 witnesses from the village who had originally corroborated his version of events, that there was enemy fire and a human shield tactic used by insurgents, had died in a car crash a week before the trial, and their statements were misplaced in the evidence room, replaced by edited footage and vague testimony from officers who'd since retired into cushy private security jobs. And suddenly Marcus understood. Someone had built a lie so big that the truth itself had become dangerous, and he was the last piece that could shatter it. And now they were getting desperate, because he wasn't just talking, that he was being heard, and Evelyn, despite the threats, promised to get the story out, said she'd already started compiling the original trial transcripts and cross-referencing inconsistencies, and Marcus told her to find one man, Captain Roland Wexler, the intelligence officer attached to their unit who'd vanished days after the ambush and whose name never appeared again in any official documentation, and Evelyn nodded, promising she'd dig until her hands bled, and the visit ended with something unspoken passing between them, not trust. Trust is too fragile, but a shared burden, and when Marcus returned to his cell, the lights flickered again, this time longer, and he realized someone was messing with the systems, maybe testing access, or maybe sending a message, and sure enough, that night, he woke to the sound of the door clicking open, a silent thing no one else would have noticed, but years of survival had honed his senses to razor sharpness, and when the shadow stepped inside, armed and quiet, Marcus reacted with the speed of someone who'd fought for breath before. Using the metal leg of his cot, he struck, disabling the intruder long enough to see his face. Not a guard, not a prisoner, but a man in black tactical gear. No insignia, no ID, and as he lay bleeding, the man croaked one word, Wexler, before slitting his own throat with a blade hidden in his boot, and blood gurgled across the concrete while Marcus sat there, panting, heart racing, realizing this wasn't just cleanup. It was war, and he was still the target, But now he had a name confirmed, a direction, a mission, and when morning came and the guards found the corpse, the warden demanded explanations, but Marcus offered none, only said, "You'd better call the Pentagon," and was moved once more, this time not for protection, but because the higher-ups had been alerted, the story was slipping, and someone wanted to bury it deeper, so they transferred him to a black site prison under the guise of containment. But Marcus, fueled by truth and fire, had already memorized what mattered, already passed enough to Evelyn to keep the story alive. And even as he was blindfolded and shackled and flown to God knows where, he whispered to himself, "They're scared, and scared men make mistakes," and miles away, Evelyn, digging deeper, found the first crack, a declassified incident report from Kandahar, heavily redacted, with one sentence left untouched. Subject Vexler ordered perimeter breach on unverified intel risk flagged by Hale. And just like that, the lie began to rot from the inside. The facility they brought him to was not on any map, not in any logbook, and not meant for men like Marcus Hale. It was a place where stories were ended, not rewritten, a concrete sarcophagus buried beneath a desert so vast and forgotten that even the stars felt distant, and Marcus, hooded, chained, and bruised, was processed not by prison staff but by men who didn't speak, didn't ask questions, didn't wear names. Their movements surgical, mechanical, like they'd done this before, too many times, and the cell he was placed in wasn't a cell at all but an observation box, glass on all four sides with only one steel door, a room designed to erase identity, to collapse time, and as he sat on the cold floor, the silence pressing in like an ocean, Marcus began to understand the scale of what he'd unearthed. This wasn't about a single village, or a rogue decision in Kandahar, this was about a program. An off-the-books operation hidden within the folds of legitimate warfare, a shadow conflict run by men who didn't wear uniforms, who answered to no government but to contracts, profit, and control, and Roland Vexler hadn't vanished because he was guilty, he'd been absorbed into the machine, made a ghost with clearance, a man whose fingerprints had been burned from every surface, and now Marcus was here, not to be interrogated, but to be erased, quietly, efficiently, like a correction to a bad memory, and outside that cell, far from the sand-choked silence, Evelyn Kincaid was bleeding, not physically, but emotionally, mentally, because she had just witnessed the murder of her editor, Paul Harlan, in a staged heart attack, right after she'd handed him a draft of her story, and the next day, her apartment was ransacked, her laptop gone, her phone bugged, and her name, once obscure, now appeared in classified alerts she wasn't supposed to see, and that's when she knew she had one choice left, to publish or to disappear, and in desperation, she contacted someone she swore she'd never speak to again, her father, retired NSA analyst Theodore Kincaid, a man with more enemies than friends and more secrets than time, who listened to her story without blinking and then said, "You have to go dark, full black, and you need to let the story go public from the inside." And what he meant was terrifying. Evelyn had to break into the same system trying to silence Marcus and upload everything she had from behind enemy lines, and the only way to do that was to follow Marcus's trail, to find the facility, to expose its existence, and to let the world hear the truth from the mouths of the damned. And while Evelyn prepared for war, Marcus wasn't waiting, because he'd spent too many years waiting, and now he watched, listened, learned the patterns of the silent guards, the gaps in surveillance, the power flickers that occurred every 6 hours like breathing. And on the third day, they brought someone new into his room, not a soldier or guard, but a psychologist, or so she claimed, named Dr. Mira Castell, whose voice was soft but rehearsed, her words crafted like scalpels, and she asked questions he didn't answer, not at first, until she slipped, said something she shouldn't have known, a detail from his unit's last patrol never disclosed in trial, and Marcus saw it then. The way her eyes flickered, the micro-expression of surprise, and he said, "You were there," and the room chilled, and she smiled the way liars do when they've been caught but still hold the knife, and said, "You think this is about justice, Marcus? This is about continuity. You're a leak. Leaks get sealed." And that night, they came for him, no warning, just steel and syringes and white coats, but Marcus was ready. He'd loosened the vent cover above the bed, fashioned the metal bolts into makeshift weapons, and when they entered, he moved, brutal, clean, efficient, disabling two, killing one, and dragging the last into the corridor before the alarm sounded, and now it was flight, blind and fast, through sterile corridors that smelled of bleach and secrets, past rooms where others, prisoners, test subjects, ghosts like him, screamed behind soundproofed walls, and somewhere deep in the facility, locked in a kennel with reinforced bars, was Buck, older now, slower, but still watching, still waiting, and when Marcus found him, Buck stood without hesitation, recognizing him even through the blood and madness, and they moved together like they always had, man and dog, through shadows and fire, and outside, far above the facility, Evelyn had arrived with her father. Using stolen clearance and a military drone to hack the security perimeter long enough to create a breach, and as gunfire erupted inside and the building went on lockdown, Marcus and Buck pushed forward, one hallway at a time, each step a choice between survival and sacrifice, until they reached the server room, the core, where Evelyn's drone dropped a hardline cable through a maintenance duct and Marcus plugged it in, sending every file, every confession, every redacted truth Evelyn had uncovered into the public cloud with failsafes to ensure it couldn't be taken down. And as the data transfer completed, Evelyn spoke through the earpiece hidden in Marcus's collar, her voice trembling. "It's out. The whole world is watching." And that was the moment everything shifted, because now they weren't ghosts. They were witnesses, and the world doesn't forget witnesses so easily, and as sirens howled and boots thundered down the halls, Marcus looked at Buck and knew they wouldn't both make it out. The dog was limping, tired, old bones barely holding together, and Marcus knelt, whispering goodbye, giving Buck one last order: "Stay. Guard the truth." And as he turned toward the final corridor, he smiled through the blood and whispered, "Good boy," and then ran, full sprint, through the gunfire, drawing their fire, letting Evelyn and her father trigger the final failsafe that detonated the communications tower, not to kill but to blind, to shut the eyes of the monster long enough for them to vanish, and when the dust settled, the facility was in chaos, its secrets no longer secret, its captives no longer silent, and somewhere, days later, in a safe house deep in the woods, Evelyn read the headlines: "Whistleblower data exposes military cover-up in Kandahar massacre, execution halted, investigation reopened," and a photo, grainy, distant, of a man and a dog standing at the edge of a fence line, looking not backward, but forward, into a horizon where truth had claws and memory had teeth, and she smiled, whispering to the wind, "Run, Marcus, run free."